done your homework? Have you researched what's known about transgender issues? Have you had a conversation about transgender issues with even one transgender person? I've been known to shout those questions at my computer when reading ignorant stuff online. Physician Gerald Jampolsky, may remember, famously said, "Love is letting go of fear." And his book by that title was a bestseller. And we often fear what's new or foreign to us. As you probably know, the UUA's new Article 2 puts love at the center of our core values as UUs. So this is a sermon about love and using knowledge to help us let go of fear about sex and gender. But let's start with the fear. In 2007, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, president of Iran, gave a speech at Columbia University in which he declared, quote, "In Iran, we don't have homosexuals like in your country." He said that in response to a question about Amnesty International's report of the week before that 200 homosexuals had been executed in Iran that year alone. On December of 2024, during December, just a few months ago, Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling declared on Twitter, quote, "There are no trans kids. No child is born in the wrong body." Well, I happen to know a child, not this one, but close enough. I'm talking about the child of a personal friend who's now 6 or 7 years old. And at birth, this child was a boy by all appearances and was given a boy's name. Almost as soon as this child could talk, and this is someone I know personally, she began correcting her parents, insisting that she was not a boy, but a girl, insisting on she, her pronouns, and consistently choosing feminine clothing. Well, thankfully, her parents didn't resist this, but they also didn't encourage it. But this child was crystal clear about who she is from the very beginning. Also, thankfully, the parents weren't aware that J.K. Rowling thinks their child does not exist. In researching for this service, I encountered an essay titled, "No, Trans is Not the New Gay." And among other things, the essay says, I'm quoting here, "There have always been gay people. There haven't always been trans people." My eyebrows went up when I read that because I already knew about Bædlings. Bædling is an Old English term whose precise definition is lost to history. But from the contexts where it is used, it meant something like queer, but not the same as homosexual. So these were women who lived as men and men who lived as women during the Middle Ages. When European colonizers came to the Americas, they labeled some of the indigenous individuals that they encountered as berdache, meaning a person who assumes the dress and social status and gender role of the other sex. This term is not a compliment. Most Native American scholars today prefer the term two-spirit, although that's also a bit controversial because it kind of erases all the nuances in how two-spirit people were accommodated by the very diverse, different indigenous cultures on this continent. But Jesuit missionary records indicate that two-spirit people were common. They were encountered in many, many different Native American cultures. So it's simply not true that transgender people are something new, like a new phenomenon. Transgenderism feels new to us in our culture for the same reason that Ahmadinejad thinks there are no gay people in Iran. Coming out until recently was suicide. More on suicide in a minute. When it comes to questions of sex and gender, there is a lot of misinformation cluttering up the social media landscape. So I want to clear up a few things that you may not know that I didn't know until fairly recently. So let's start with biological sex. We'll set all the transgender stuff aside just for a minute. Here is a lovely bit of misinformation that you've probably seen on Facebook. We all learned this in high school biology, right? Simple, straightforward, and wrong. Mind you, I'm not offended by it any more than I'm offended by this. Hashtag, oh, well, you know. No, the problem with this is that it's mostly correct most of the time, just like this is mostly correct most of the time. It becomes wrong when we do this to it. So let's get into the genetics. There's a simple experiment that we used to do routinely in high school biology classes. You may have done this yourself. You scrape some cells from the inside of your cheek and you put them on a microscope slide with a little bit of stain. And when you look under the microscope, you see something like this. And in any one cell, only one X chromosome is active at a time. So in cells that have more than one X, like in most human females, one of them gets curled up into an inactive little speck called a Barr body. And typically, girls have Barr bodies and boys don't. And it was a great hands-on way to introduce kids to genetics, especially sex chromosomes. The reason I say we used to do this experiment is because all too often, a boy's cheek cells would show Barr bodies, or a girl's cheek cells wouldn't. Third period biology class is not the best time and place for a girl to learn that she's XY or a boy that he's XX, right? Traumatic. To explore how that could even happen, let's begin with cats. And here I have to credit our friend, Dr. Miles McGovney, for explaining this to Ann and me. And Miles is a physician who's completing their residency at the Penn State Hershey Medical Center, so a neighbor of ours. I should also say that much of what I'm sharing today was distilled from a longer presentation for school nurses that Ann and Dr. McGovney created together. And that is available now for school nurse associations if they'd like to get a handle on some of this stuff. So if you know any school nurses, connect them with Ann. It's powerful. All right, so cats. Most orange cats are male and most calicos are female. And this is because the gene for fur color in cats is carried on the X chromosome. It can be orange or black. And the Y chromosome doesn't have anything to do with the fur color. So here are all the normal combinations that you can have. No problem, right? Except, anyone know of a male calico? It happens. How does that happen? This is all the possible combinations, right? Well, sometimes a sperm or egg gets 2 sex chromosomes, so the baby ends up with 3 sex chromosomes. Male calicos are XXY. And you might wonder if that makes for a male or a female because they have 2 X's, right? So that might be a female, but you also have a Y there, so it could be a male. You'll know in a few minutes. But first I need to explain that the opposite can happen too. You can end up with no sex chromosome in the sperm or egg. And when that happens, you get one of these. So this is why a simple high school biology experiment can reveal an intersex condition. There are others too. That's just one way. There are normal human beings out there that are XXY and XO. XXY is called Klinefelter syndrome, and it's usually males, and it's usually diagnosed at puberty when it is diagnosed at all. The symptoms are often completely undetectable. And the medical system does not routinely test for Klinefelter. So the prevalence of this syndrome in humans is unknown. But we know it's at least 1 in every 500 people that are assigned male at birth. And Klinefelter boys have Barr bodies. Turner syndrome girls are diagnosed more often because they do show some symptoms like small chins, low hairlines. They tend to have weak hearts, but not always, and big ears. But again, none of those are consistent across girls with Turner syndrome. And they don't have Barr bodies because they only have 1 X chromosome in each cell. So as you can see, this oversimplified meme leaves a lot to be desired. But biological sex actually isn't based on chromosomes at all. It's primarily governed by one single gene, the SRY gene, which is usually on the Y chromosome. There's a whole lot of confusing text on this slide. So for now, just kind of ignore it and listen. Embryos all start out with the same protogenitals, like at the top there, that thing up at the top. And that yellow thing can grow into the glands of a penis or into a clitoris. And the purple bit can become the shaft of a penis or the inner labia of a vulva. The blue part can turn itself into a scrotum or to the outer labia. Which path it takes depends on the presence of the SRY protein, which is made by the SRY gene, which is usually on the Y chromosome. So when that protein is around, the cells, as they develop, take the path that leads to male anatomy. And the reason I say the SRY is usually on the Y chromosome is because during cell division to make sperm or eggs, it sometimes crosses over and ends up on the X chromosome. And that leads to the development of an XX person with male parts. And they are fully male because the SRY gene was present during their development. Just as often, you have a Y chromosome with no SRY gene, leading to the development of an XY person that's fully biologically female. We don't test babies to see what chromosomes they have unless there's a problem. So XY females and XX males don't have any symptoms. So the prevalence of this kind of crossover is unknown. Could be you. And the point here is that we don't need to know because there's nothing to see here. There's nothing wrong with these people. The only thing wrong is memes like this one, if understood as anything other than how things usually work. But deviations from what's usual are still completely normal and natural. I think this is why we have to put love at the center of our lives, our political, social, and spiritual, and I would add our scientific lives as well. Intersex biology may be kind of new and kind of complex and a little unsettling, but it's all still perfectly normal and natural. We just didn't know that these things were happening. People with these or any other intersex conditions are inherently worthy of love and respect and full civil rights. It is reasonable to have a conversation about fairness in sports when we have chosen to divide humanity's physical bell curve into categories using gender instead of, say, height or bone mass or natural hormone levels. You know, I don't know what's going to happen with women's sports or even really what should happen, but I am sure that you can't use either genitals or sex chromosomes as a basis for determining someone's biological sex. They're just inadequate for that. I also know that there are more news articles about transgender athletes than there are transgender athletes. Just in the New York Times alone, there are more. Fear is a means of control in our culture, and the newness of the science makes us prone to weaponizing our fear, like in this meme. Just look at that girl's face. They chose this photo for a reason. I hope you haven't seen this meme before. Awful as it is, there's a surprising backstory that is deliberately missing. This is indeed two high school wrestlers competing in the girls' wrestling league. Here's the thing. Both of them were assigned female at birth. The one on top is not a trans woman, as the meme implies. He's not a biological male beating up on biological females. He's a trans man named Mac Beggs. He wanted to compete in the boys' league, but the rules in Texas require high school athletes to compete according to the sex on their birth certificates. He won the Texas State Wrestling Championship in 2017 and again in 2018, and some people cried foul. The controversy is that Beggs was taking testosterone at the time under medical care for transitioning from female to male, and critics of his wins call that doping. However, he deliberately took a lower dose than is medically recommended for transition so as to stay below the levels of testosterone that would even count as doping. So his doctors say it's not relevant, tiny amounts of testosterone. Now 26, Beggs is a professional wrestler and doing well. But this meme is still making the rounds on Facebook without any mention of the true story. Now, you may have noticed that I jumped from biological sex to transgender issues. They are related, but they're not the same, and neither one is a binary. The genetics of biological sex, as complex as they are pretty well known. But keep in mind, I've barely scratched the surface here. There are lots of other hormonal and genetic factors that come up during fetal development that can lead to lots of varieties of sex expression by the time of birth. The origins of gender are far more complex and mysterious than sex, which helps explain why it's still so controversial. Gender is how we perceive ourselves in relation to social norms and roles and behavior. And when gender and sex are different, it often causes gender dysphoria. I am not on the slide I want to be on. There we go. Now, none of this should still be controversial, even given the complexity and the unknowns. Here's a list of professional organizations that, quote, recognize the medical necessity of treatments for gender dysphoria and endorse such treatments, end quote. It's a small font because there's so many that wouldn't fit on the slide. And you know, these are not fringe organizations. What we do know is way more than can be covered in one sitting, let alone one service. But I want to touch on just a few of the known factors. First, a few terms that you've probably heard, maybe not. Cis and trans are terms borrowed from organic chemistry. If you have no gender dysphoria, you're probably cis, meaning same. With dysphoria, trans. So I am a cis male. Tennis champion Renee Richards is a trans female. Got it? All right. AMAB and AFAB refer to what's on your birth certificate, which until recently was always either male or female. But as you now know, it can be different from your actual biological sex. I'm AMAB, and so is Renee Richards. Twin and family studies, so now we're getting into the factors. Twin and family studies suggest there's a possible genetic factor, although no specific genes have been identified just yet. Prenatal exposure to hormones are thought maybe to influence the development of the brain. For example, there is good evidence from animal studies that estrogen mimicking chemicals in the environment from plastics and pesticides can disrupt sex differentiation in wildlife. We see this happening. So maybe at low levels, it can also affect human brain development in some way. We really just don't know yet. The brains of cis men and women show slight differences in structure and activity. They're minor, but AI systems can now identify someone's sex about 90% of the time using only a brain scan. So with that as background, transgender people's brains often look and function a little more like those of their gender than their sex assigned at birth, but not always. That's about all we know about causes. Respecting the inherent worth and dignity of trans people, I think, is important because the rate, I don't just think this, it is important because the rate of attempted suicide among trans people is 40% in the United States, compared with 0.6% among adults generally. It's a big, big difference. A note about pronouns. I know they can seem like a distraction, especially in the political arena, distraction from things that maybe feel a little more important. I also know that if someone consistently referred to me as she and her, it would get old really fast. I also know that transgender youth who have their pronouns respected attempt suicide at half the rate of those who do not have their pronouns respected. So they do matter. If even one part of a young transgender person's lives, whether we're talking about home or school or church, if one context in their life honors their chosen name, it decreases suicidal ideation by 29% and suicide attempts by 56%. Dr. McGovney says that the most effective medicine that doctors have for decreasing suicide generally is lithium, with an effectiveness rate of 13%. So using the right pronouns and names is a powerful medical intervention with transgender youth. The last time Ann and I visited my friend, his child had the entire living room floor covered with Legos. She was wearing a t-shirt and jeans with a tutu over the jeans. She ran around the house wanting us to see how fast she could run and excitedly telling us about the 3D printer that she and her dad were building things with. And I admit, you may be too, I admit that I was looking for clues about this child's mind regarding gender roles and, the kinds of toys that a girl should be playing with. And of course, she reminded me with her existence that a trans girl doesn't have to be limited by my gender stereotypes, right? She loves what she loves. That's all there is to say. I suppose it's possible that her perceptions of her gender might change at puberty or some other time, or maybe never. I guess the question is, does it really matter? As Mr. Rogers said to open our service, to love someone is to strive to accept that person exactly the way he or she is, right here and now. I plan to continue loving my friend and his child and her family as she grows and matures. I think love demands no less. May it be so.